So hi everyone, my name is Eder and welcome to another Project Wesker video. In today's video, I'm actually going to be reviewing Welcome to Raccoon City, which I just watched just a couple of hours ago. For those of you that have been watching me for quite some time know that the reason I wear sunglasses sometimes is because I'm extremely light sensitive. And so yeah, I did have to watch the movie with my sunglasses on because there was a couple of scenes where there was just a lot of, in the dark, a lot of shots being fired. And so that explains that. But I do want to answer the question right from the get-go, is this movie worth watching in movie theaters? And was it better than the Milla Jovovich movies? So for those two answers, the short answer is yes, though it's complicated. And so I will be explaining my full, the full reason as to why I say yes, but it's not a simple yes or no answer. It really depends. But anyways, we'll get to that. So right before we do get started, I just wanted to mention my mentality going into this movie. And so for those of you that have watched my other trailer breakdowns, you guys know that, right from, when I saw the first trailer or when I saw the first synopsis of the movie, I noticed right away that there was a huge issue with the fact that they were trying to combine Resident Evil 1 story and Resident Evil 2 story into one movie, right? There was going to be some issues. And so right from the get-go, I did assume that this movie wasn't going to be perfect. There was going to be some changes, some major changes, since that is a huge thing to combine for the number one and second story into one movie. So that was always my mentality going into this movie, that I knew for certain that it wasn't going to be perfect, but I was just hoping that it was better than those Milla Jovovich movies. And I think that they were. Personally, that's my opinion. You might disagree with me, for those of you that have watched it, or for those of you, that will watch it, since a lot of my viewers, don't live in North America. And I know that the dates are a little bit different. I think Australia releases on 27th or 26th, correct me if I'm wrong. And I think in Europe, it's releasing on the 3rd, and also in other countries around the world. But going back to what I was saying, right, that was always my mentality going into this movie. And so my expectations were always on the lower side. And I was, like I said, I was cautiously optimistic. But did I have a good time? Overall, I did have a good time. And you know what? The majority of the stuff that I broke down, the majority of stuff that I theorized in my breakdown videos that I did for all of the trailers, most of it, I would say like probably 80% or maybe even more were on the money. They were exactly as I predicted them to be. I do have to mention, though, that one of the things that really surprised me and kind of ticked me off was near the credits. Now, it wasn't the post-credit scene, and for those of you that don't know, if you haven't watched the movie yet, as soon as you go to the movie theaters, make sure to stay like 5 minutes after they start rolling the credits. But because there is it's not at the end of the credits. I did hear another viewer state that it's kind of like the middle. So right when the movie ends, they show the director, the cast, and then after there's a small scene and then the credits. But I'm talking about the credits specifically. There is something that really ticked me off. What was that? Well, I'm going to talk about that soon. Now, my initial concern with watching this movie is that I don't think that it's for everyone. I really don't think so. And you know what? Sure enough, I did go and watch this movie with my little brother. And my little brother, he has played, a lot of the Resident Evil games. The thing is that, he's not the biggest fan of Resident Evil, but he is a fan of the games. He has played them. But, he hasn't played like all of them. You know what I mean? And so he does have an idea of Resident Evil. He does know the characters really well. But, he doesn't know all of the lore and the backstory for a lot of the stuff. And so even for him, sometimes he stated something that was very, that concerned me a little. He told me that sometimes he was a little lost with the story. And some of it, it's due to the writing, and others, it's due to the fact that, that this movie isn't just I don't think it's for everyone. I don't think it's for somebody that doesn't have a lot of information on Resident Evil prior to going to the movie, and that kind of reminds me of another movie that recently came out, Dune. I think Dune personally was my favorite movie of the year so far. I know that Spider-Man's going to come out in just next month, but Dune right now is my favorite movie of the year. In that movie, they did a lot of explaining. They had to explain a lot of the lore. Most of the majority was paced very slowly, but it was also paced not too slowly, but it was explaining a lot of information. And I know that isn't really, it's not for everyone. And I remember seeing on TikTok when the movie came out, a lot of people were like, yeah, I didn't understand the story. I didn't get it. I don't like movies that you have to know some information before going to the movie theaters, to actually have a good experience. The movie should do a good job explaining. Well, I think it did do an excellent job of explaining. But I also had my mom, who was a huge fan of the original Dune, and so she was already telling me, the majority of the story and the lore behind a lot of the movie characters, right? And so that helped a lot, and I guess I did have a different experience from just the average person who's never heard of Dune, and that was their first movie. Now the reason I mentioned Dune is because this movie, they did try to add the lore, right? They did try to explain a lot of the lore, but the main issue that I think was really, apparent in this movie is that it was very short. It's 107 minutes, so that's what, an hour and a half. I don't think, it needed more time, especially since the director put that on his shoulders, that he had to combine the first two games into one movie. And that was, like I said, that was one of the major issues. That was a red flag for me from the get-go, that basically alerted me to basically thinking that this movie isn't going to be perfect. There's going to be some changes. There's going to be some rushed scenes, rushed things like that. And that's exactly what I saw, right? But you know what? I don't fault the director completely. I don't think this all falls under him. I don't think this is all his fault. And I talked about this with a lot of you guys in my trailer breakdown videos. It's very weird that this movie was actually supposed to come out on September 3rd. That was the initial release of Welcome to Raccoon City. But a weird thing that happened was, right from the get-go, was that, we didn't, when September 3rd was on its way, I think it was like August, I was like, I haven't heard any trailers for this movie. We haven't received any information. It wasn't really promoted correctly. And even after they did announce that this movie was going to be pushed back to the November 24th release, it still wasn't being promoted that much. We only got the majority, and I'd say the majority of the trailers only last month. Like the month of October is the month where we just started getting so many trailers weekly. And then near the end, right, just the past week, we got like how many trailers? I think I did like 3 reactions in 1 week, and then the next week, this week, I think there was 2 more videos or 3 more videos. It was kind of crazy. It's almost like they were late to the game, and so that's weird, and I did state that. I did have a lot of conversations with you guys in the comments. That to me is weird, so that's why I say I don't know. I don't blame all of this on the director. And since a movie is a very collaborative kind of work, right, it's you can't just blame it on one person. Even though he was the writer and director, you have to remember that there's also executive producers, these big companies that are just, that probably didn't have a lot of faith in him. The fact that this movie wasn't promoted well, it didn't have a long, it wasn't that long. So I know that the movie, I'm sure there's a bunch of cuts that happened that he had to take out, major cuts, and then had to, in the editing room, and then actually had to meld all of those scenes together so the story was, it made sense to the audience. And so I have to take that into account. And going back to what I mentioned about the credits, right, there was something that ticked me off. Well, what was that? You might be asking, what pissed you off about the credits? I saw the name Paul W.S. Anderson as one of the executive producers. Now, let me know, correct me if I'm wrong, because as soon as I watched the last bit of the scene and then all of a sudden the credits started to roll, it did show show the director, show the executive producers, and then Paul W.S. Anderson showed up. But it happened so quickly that I was like, wait, what? I actually took down my glasses. I was like, what, am I seeing this correctly? Because yeah, I had no idea that Paul W.S. Anderson was part of this movie. And if I am correct, right, because it happened so quickly, I'm pretty sure that his name was under the executive producer, list. Executive producers have a huge say on what goes on in the movie. And so what I think probably occurred in this movie, this is all just speculation, right? I don't have evidence for this, but what I can safely, theorize is that I think that, they probably didn't have a lot of faith on Johannes Roberts. They didn't have a lot of faith in him. They probably just assumed that, hey, okay, you know what, I like that you're probably rebooting the movies. It's going to be different than what Paul W.S. Anderson did with his movies. But you know what, just to be on the safe side, Screen Gems and Constantine Films, they probably agreed, you know what, we're gonna have Paul W.S. Anderson oversee this whole project, and he's going to basically guide you through making this movie. And so I don't know where the decision came from combining the Resident Evil 1 game and Resident Evil 2 story into one movie. I don't know if that was the decision of Johannes Roberts, because like I said, executive producers have a lot of say, and have even more say, more pull over the directors, and I can think of a couple of movies where that's been the case. Like if we look at Star Wars, this is just a quick side note, right? Star Wars had the same issue occur to George Lucas. The executive, all these production companies were really on his case about how they wanted the movie. They're like, no, we're providing the money for this movie, so we're going to tell you exactly what we think you should do with it. And so, George Lucas was fighting a lot with these production companies. And at the end, he said, forget that. I'm actually just going to make my own production company. And that's where Lucasfilm started, right? He actually decided to make his own production company because he had just enough of Hollywood executives, all of these, guys that are just interested in money, right? And like I said, going back to what I was saying about Screen Gems, Sony Screen Gems and Constantine Films, they've made a ton of movies with the Paul W.S. Anderson movies. How come the Paul W.S. Anderson movies were funded so well? They were promoted like any other movie. And for this movie, we just got like what? We didn't get any promotion until the month right before the movie came out. Like what? Like it almost felt like the person that was promoting this movie just didn't care. Like he wasn't doing his full job. He was just being very lazy about it. All very nonchalant. Like, yeah, we'll do it right in the month. It wasn't promoted well. But even when I went to the movies, I was gonna take a picture for Instagram right next to the poster at the cinema. Right, I was actually going to do that on Instagram. I was going to say, I'm watching Welcome to Raccoon City, because I was excited and stuff. And there was no posters outside of the theater. There was no posters. Like, what is that? There's posters for every other movie except for Welcome to Raccoon City. And so I looked around inside of the movie theater. It was a really nice movie theater also. I've never been there. Like I said, it's been since before the pandemic, since I've gone to go watch a movie at the movie theater. But what I'm saying is that that's weird that there's not even a poster that shows that this is what this movie is. And right before you go into the movie, there's usually like a poster there. Yeah, there wasn't a poster, which is just really weird. So let me know down in the comments if you guys experienced that same thing. Did your movie theater have a poster of Welcome to Raccoon City? This is weird. So I kind of want to know. Is there a pattern here? Is this just this movie theater, or was it just everywhere? And also the fact that this movie came out, it only came out in select movie theaters, so it wasn't available to all of the movie theaters throughout the whole nation. Now, I get that there was a pandemic. I get that not a lot of people are going to the movie theaters, but they are forcing people to go. And then, a lot of movies like 007, No Time to Die, are coming out, or Shang-Chi, right? They're coming out only in theaters, but then they're releasing it digitally. And or what happened with Dune is that they released the movie digitally, and then they released it at the movie theaters. And so again, that's really weird. That's really weird. Like there's something that went on behind the scenes. And and let me know down in the comments if you agree with me, because I think there's something weird that definitely went on. Another associate producer that I had no idea that was part of the movie until I just saw the recent trailer, I think yesterday or before yesterday, was the associate producer was Hiroyuki Kobayashi. Now, Hiroyuki Kobayashi, he's actually one of the producers or programmers that worked on the original Resident Evils. He's done several of the games and other games in the Resident Evil, but then after he switched to a producer role for a lot of the games, like Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6, I've talked about him, especially when I spoke about the Infinite Darkness, So he was the Capcom's representative. That was the guy that I'm assuming Johannes Roberts spoke to about getting the blueprints of Welcome to Raccoon City's architecture and stuff. And so I think that Hiroyuki Kobayashi being part of the movie was a good thing. I do think that was great, and I think that was the Capcom representative that was unnamed in a lot of the interviews that I saw, or a lot of the articles, especially IGN's articles on the movie. But this movie, like I stated, right, this movie was way too short. It really was, and I actually spoke about this with my brother as soon as we left the movie theater. I was like, I thought that the beginning atmosphere of the movie was really amazing. I thought it was really well done. But after like around the 30-minute mark, or I would even say, my brother said even 20-minute mark, it almost felt, and I said this, I was like, it almost felt like the director had to go to the bathroom. It really did. For the rest of the movie, after the 30-minute mark, it felt like everything had to be rushed. Everything had to be rushed. So the story, the lore, everything was just like, very quickly. And, it's funny that I say that because, I just talked about Dune. And, Dune, the first movie that came out in the 80s. I watched that one right before watching the new one, and that movie felt like it was fast forwarded. Like there was so much information that was just zipping by, so much lore, so much of this. And so I really appreciated that the new movie had the time to slow down everything and explain everything in detail for the audience. But I also realized that not everybody liked that. There was a lot of TikTok comments about Dune that a lot of people were like, no, I don't like that. I don't want to know all this information. I'm confused. I don't get it. So I also understand that some people just don't really care about lore also. And so that's what concerns me about this movie. I'm very concerned to see, I don't think that this movie is for just your average viewer. I don't think it's just for somebody that has no idea of Resident Evil, or all of the information that they do have on Resident Evil is based on the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, because that is the case, right? I mean, I've talked to several people, including my parents. I told them about this movie coming out and how it's going to be closer to the lore. And my mom was like, oh, so they're going to show Alice and they're going to show all these other characters. And I told my mom, well, no, that's actually, the Alice isn't part of the original story. That's something that the director added in those Paul W.S. Anderson movies. And so, and with other people that I've had conversations with, a lot of them don't know, unless you're a Resident Evil fan, that those movies had nothing to do with the original source material. And unfortunately, what makes it so hard to review a video game movie is that most video game movies are their own things. We can look at movies that just came out, like Sonic. I didn't watch Sonic, but what I could tell from the trailers, that had nothing to do with the games. It was on Earth, but people enjoyed it. People had a good time with it. I don't think it was the best movie, but I'm pretty sure people never said that, but they said it was pretty okay. Detective Pikachu, I did watch that movie, but that movie had nothing to do with the original source material of Ash, going through a Pallet Town or in the Kanto region. You know what I mean? But I thought it was an okay movie, but it was its own thing. That's fine, but it had nothing to do with the source material. If we go back a couple of years prior to that, we could look at Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed, they kind of told the same kind of story that was with Desmond. If you know Assassin's Creed, you know what I mean. But that whole Desmond arc, which was the main character for that video game for like the first 3 games, and then they forgot about him, was one of the worst parts of Assassin's Creed. Nobody cared about that part. Nobody. Everybody that I've talked to that's played Assassin's Creed, nobody liked that story. And so for that movie, they did their own thing in Spain rather than in Italy, and they tried to fix the story, but audiences didn't like it. They didn't like it at the end of the day. I thought it was a lot better because, like I said, I couldn't stand Desmond. There was some changes that they did to the movie, especially if we're talking about video game to movie adaptations. There was some changes that I liked, but it wasn't perfect. And so and I was also talking about this with my brother, right? I also asked him, do you know of a video game movie that actually stuck to the source material and did a good job? Well, he did mention to me that there's a game called Arcane, and that they did a show about that, and that was done very well. Now, I don't know anything about that, but he said the lore was done, it was pretty good. That's what he told me. I can't say much about that, but what I was getting at is that that's what makes it very hard for me to critique this movie, because like I said, there's not a lot of video game movies that are really trying to stick to the source material. This, I think, is one of the very few, or maybe, ever, I wouldn't say ever, but I guess one of the very few video game movies that was trying to actually stick close to the source material. But there wasn't enough time, like I stated. There wasn't enough time. There's only, an hour and a half of a movie. And like I said, the first 30 minutes were great. I would have liked it if the movie was like that for the rest of it, but then it was like, okay, the director had to go to the bathroom for the rest of the movie. We were just fed information and stuff. And for somebody that doesn't know about Resident Evil, it could be very confusing. And there was also some issues, right, which I will talk about later, issues that didn't really quite make sense, or they didn't fully explain. And so for somebody that doesn't have a backstory in Resident Evil, doesn't understand the lore, or never heard of the lore, it would also be like missing information, right? It wasn't done properly. But I like I said, I don't think this is only the director's fault. I don't think that's his fault, right? I think that, like I said, there's something definitely behind the scenes. I think that there was something that was going on. I don't think these production companies had a lot of faith in this director. And the fact that Paul W.S. Anderson was an executive producer, that was my understanding. Like I said, I had to double take. I was like, what is Paul W.S. Anderson doing a part of this movie? You know what I mean? he probably made some changes. And, there's other movies, like I stated, with Star Wars had to fight the executive producer. There was also another case where I heard that Kevin Smith, he's a huge comic book nerd. Kevin Smith, he said one time, I saw in a video, that he was actually making a Superman movie, and it was going to be all very close to the comic books. The story was going to be taken and adapted from the comic books. And at the end, there was one executive producer that would not let him do the movie unless he added a random boss fight with a giant mecha spider, like a robot spider. And Kevin Smith was like, no, I don't want to do that. Why would Superman be fighting a mecha spider? And at the end, Kevin Smith backed out of the whole thing. He said, what, I'm not going to do that. You really want this spider to be part of this movie, and I think it'll just be really awful. Well, it turns out, I think a year later, Kevin Smith, he did state that he saw the movie Wild Wild West, that old movie with Will Smith, if you haven't watched it. Anyways, at the end of that movie, there was a mecha spider, and it was the same executive producer. And so sometimes, in Hollywood, these directors have to go through a lot of hoops that happens behind the scenes that is just unnecessary. They put a lot of pressure on them because they're providing the money, so they have to adhere to what these higher executive producers are telling them to do, right? And recently I could also think of an anime that they were trying to turn into a live action on Netflix, Avatar: The Last Airbender. I'm a huge fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and what I thought was really cool about that Netflix's adaptation is that they were actually going to have the original creators be a part of the project. They were the one controlling everything, but they also backed out of the project after like 2 years of working on it, or even more, because the executive producers at Netflix wouldn't allow them to do what they wanted to do. And so, going back to what I was saying, there's a lot of this type of stuff that happens behind the scenes that we don't know about. We'll probably know about it later, but that's what I suspect happened with Welcome to Raccoon City. So now we're actually going to be talking about a couple of the scenes that were in the movie. So if you haven't watched the movie, now's a good time to go watch the movie, or wait until it releases in your country or your region, and then come back and watch the rest of the video, because I am going to be talking about scenes now. And so one of the things that I noticed was different, and that I didn't personally like, was Leon and Wesker. Leon and Wesker in this movie were very different. I have to say that, all of the other actors, they were fine in my opinion. Well, I would say Chief Irons, Wesker, and Leon were kind of different. Now let me explain, right? For Wesker's case, I thought Wesker kind of was a mix between Barry and a mix between Albert Wesker and a mix between something else. In the trailers that we did see, where they were talking in the character vignette trailer of Wesker, we did see that they didn't want to make him a villain outright, like a typical villain, like it was in the video games. In the video games, he had sunglasses, he looked very shady. You could tell right away in the video games that guy was the villain. In this movie, they made him more like, he was just a guy that was being paid off of Umbrella. He was a good guy at heart, but he was just in a different situation, and so he wasn't the villain. He wasn't the villain yet, but he was doing something that was unethical, and, he was going to try to get the virus and leave Raccoon City. That's what happens in the movie. And that's why I mentioned it was kind of similar to like Barry, because that's what happened with Barry. Barry was a good guy in the games, but they were threatening his family, if I'm correct. It's been a while since I've played the original 3 games, so correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think that's what was happening, right? He had to take care of his family, so he had to betray the S.T.A.R.S teams, his brothers, essentially, his brothers in arms. So they kind of played those 2 characters into one. Now, and going back to Leon, right? I do want to touch on that topic in just a little bit, but let's go to Leon. Leon's character, the director in the character vignette trailer did say that he wanted Leon to be like the rookie cop from the OG Resident Evil 2. And like I said, it's been a while since I played those games. And then he also wanted to combine the remake Leon. And so there was some issues, right? I mean, Leon in this movie, he was kind of like the rookie cop who didn't know what was going on. That was fine, but there was issues in the fact that, he was kind of a little too it was kind of a little dumb at times, really dumb. But they did, if we remember correctly, in the remake, since that's the latest, iteration of Resident Evil 2 that I played, there was a scene where Marvin basically talks to Leon and tells him, right before you start your journey as Leon, he tells him, and I thought that was a really great scene in the video game remake, that Marvin basically explains to Leon, hey, don't do what I did. Don't be stupid like me. If you see one of those creatures, don't think that they're human. You shoot them, and he grabs them and tells him, you shoot them, don't mess around. Don't think that they're human. Just shoot them and make sure that they're dead. Because in the video game, in the remake, they did really show, in Resident Evil 3 remake, they showed how Marvin got infected by trusting Brad Vickers, and the zombie bit him. Right? And so I like that aspect of the video games. And for the movie, they didn't have Marvin they didn't have Marvin in the movie. But going back to what I was saying with Leon is that it took Leon. It wasn't until that point where Leon started getting serious in the movie, right? And that was when, after he talked to Ben Bertolucci and he was pointing a gun at him in the prison cell, and Claire's like, yeah, you gotta smarten up or you're gonna get killed, and he almost did get killed. And that's when we see Leon actually become the Leon that we know, right? He's not just going around kind of like hungover and stuff. And I thought that was very interesting that they added that, because that is part of the lore, even though, like I said, I haven't read the books, but my viewers did tell me that in Emily's Diner, that's where Leon was right before his first day on the job. He was hungover and stuff, and sure enough, that guy that was that we could barely see in that screenshot where he was on the counter, that was indeed Leon, who was just he was sleeping right before his shift, or I think his shift was about to start. I don't know, that wasn't specified, but that I think his shift started, but since he was in the diner with all the other S.T.A.R.S members, he's like, I'm just gonna relax. I'm just gonna go to bed. Yeah, they were kind of mean to him too. They kind of explained a lot of stuff with the they gave a backstory to Leon, they gave a backstory to Chris and Claire. They gave that didn't really bother me much. But what did bother me is that we didn't really see Leon grow. So in the games, we saw Leon going around the mansion, going around RPD. He was shooting zombies. He was getting better at that. But of course, he was still a rookie near the end. But obviously, he had gone through something that was huge. And I like how later, like the C.G.I. movies, Infinite Darkness or Resident Evil 4, you saw how his skills improved. And by the end, right, Resident Evil 6, he's like a pro, right? Resident Evil Vendetta, he was just doing all this gun fu, shooting all the zombies. It was awesome. And so I really like that about the video games and the CGI movies. They really did a good job of capturing, how Leon gets better, how he becomes a pro. But with this movie, since it was so short that, Claire and Leon's journey through RPD, their whole journey through the movie, I think they only killed, I think Leon only killed one zombie, and then he also at the end shot Birkin with the rocket launcher. That's it. I'm pretty sure Claire, how many zombies did she kill? I think she probably killed like 3 with her shotgun, including Birkin. I don't remember if she killed the zombie lady, that clip that we saw with the itchy tasty clip. I don't think she killed that zombie. I think she just pushed her off and then ran away. Yeah, I think she ran away. So I think, there wasn't a lot of zombies that were killed in Claire and Leon's, part of the story of Welcome to Raccoon City. And I think that's due to the fact that, like I said, there was time constraints. Now, if we look at what Chris went through, Chris, on the other hand, he had a lot of zombies. Like, his kill ratio was pretty good. He killed a lot of zombies in the mansion. Right as soon as they go in the mansion, they split up. I really liked how Chris and Richard were together. And then all of a sudden, how Chris was trying to help Enrico. That was Enrico at the end that got bitten by that first zombie encounter that we know from the games. But in the movies, it wasn't the first zombie encounter. But that scene that I'm talking about, that scene with the zombie turning and he's looking at Chris. That scene, that was a good scene. I really liked how he went over to Enrico. He was tending to his wounds, telling him, keep pressure, man, keep pressure. And then all of a sudden, Richard's getting attacked. And then Chris is getting attacked by like 3 zombies. I really liked that scene because it just showed how powerful the zombies were. Even if we look at the Resident Evil video games, every video game most of the games have different types of viruses. And so, and in the Paul W.S. Anderson movies, they kind of just made every zombie be the same. They were all weak zombies. I really liked how they kept that aspect of the zombies in the from the games, and they transferred that to the movies. So, when Chris was fighting the three zombies, and I actually broke down that scene where they were fighting, Richard was fighting three zombies, but he actually ultimately got killed, right? There was no yawn, and that was something that I suspected. But going back to what I was talking about, Chris, Chris was literally fighting for his life. And I really like that. I really like that it wasn't just these slow moving zombies that were super weak and you can just push them and, that's it. It wasn't like that. It was that, they were super strong, and you could see, the actor, he was fighting, pushing all of the zombies out. I really like that aspect. And the zombies in the movie, and I actually spoke about this with my brother, he thought they looked really good. And I actually did mention this in my trailer breakdown, that the zombies do look really, they were really well done. The makeup, I don't know who the makeup was, but I also liked, and I mentioned this in my trailer breakdowns, that I really liked how the zombies, you could see that difference of them, first getting infected, and then they're kind of losing hair, and then all of a sudden, then they turn into like a full-blown zombie. It wasn't just they get infected and they turn into a full-blown zombie. There's a transition to it, and I really like that. So I think they did a really good job with the zombies. I liked how they made the zombies really strong, because that's exactly how it is in the games. The zombies, the T-virus was made to give it was an experimental program to make people super, I guess, essentially like super soldiers. But if the virus didn't go well with the person, it turned them into flesh-eating zombies, right? And so, but they were really strong, and I like that. It was just like the remake, when you're trying to push a zombie off of you, you're dealing with somebody that's like a lot stronger than just a typical human. So that aspect I really liked. Chris had a lot of scenes where he was killing zombies. I thought that was all really well shot. Like I said, there was that scene where he was just shooting a bunch of zombies, and there's a lot of flashes. I couldn't really watch that scene, so I had to cover my eyes with my sunglasses because of my light sensitivity. So that was funny, but yeah, I mean, I really like that aspect. And also the other aspect that, I was kind of unsure about was the CGI. In the trailers, it didn't really look the best. I know those were trailers, and I know that, it wasn't the final product. But at the end, I don't think the CGI bothered me that much. It was used with the liquor, it was used with the dog, it was used with Birkin being infected with his final form. It wasn't a huge bummer for me to see the CGI. I thought it was okay. What really I think it wasn't good for the movie is that everything was just constrained. The time constraint really affected the movie's, I think, atmosphere. Everything was just, like I mentioned, it almost felt like the director had to go to the bathroom. So that's the only thing. But the CGI I thought was decent. I don't think it bothered me. And also going back to what I was talking about with Barry, and how he was very similar to Wesker, and how that Barry wasn't in the movie. Barry and Rebecca didn't show up in the movie. Now I think that the reason why the director didn't include Barry and Rebecca is because in the video games, this is the OG Resident Evil games and the new remakes, they did a horrible job at explaining what happens with Barry and Rebecca. In the first Resident Evil 1 and the remake, you had the option that if you played as Jill, you would go around with Barry, and then after you would basically save your partner Chris, and then you would, at the end of the day, if you got a good ending, you would leave the helicopter with Barry, Jill, and Chris. There was no Rebecca. Now, on the other hand, if you played as Chris, you would actually you would go around with Rebecca, and then you would save your partner Jill, but there was no Barry. And so that made no sense. That was some Japanese storytelling that made no sense. And they just left it like that. I mean, I guess they didn't really pay too much attention to that small detail, even though it doesn't even make any sense. And to this day, I have no idea what they were thinking. And then in the Resident Evil 3 game, you see Barry is actually there, and he actually saves Jill from Raccoon City. But in the remake of Resident Evil 3, they scratched that out. No, there is no Barry that comes to help you. It's just Carlos and Jill. They just escape Raccoon City on the helicopter. So that right there is an aspect of the video games that had to be changed. It was something that was in dire need of an upgrade. It had to be changed. It had to be fixed. And so, since there wasn't enough time to fix anything, I do believe that the director just ultimately just decided, you know what, there's something weird here. There's something weird with the story. We're just going to omit that. So we're not going to have Barry. We're not going to have Rebecca, just because I don't have time to fix the story. I don't have time to fix that story. So that was understandable why Barry and Rebecca weren't in the movie. One of the things, though, that I did like about the movie was how they explained that the S.T.A.R.S members were inoculated, or they were given some kind of vitamin or some kind of shot, right, so that they wouldn't get infected with the T virus. I thought that was really well written. I thought that was really well done. And the reason why I believe that is because in the video games, we know that Wesker sent the S.T.A.R.S team and was in the mansion, sent the S.T.A.R.S teams to the mansion and was in the mansion and left, was because he was trying to collect data for Umbrella on how the zombies would react to, the special task force, right, that was in Raccoon City. And so, it would make sense why they would give them, a shot so that they wouldn't just get infected from them drinking water. And so in the movie, of course, they didn't explain all of that Resident Evil lore, that Wesker was also there collecting data on the S.T.A.R.S team members. But I really liked how they really focused on, Chris was drinking water. Claire looked at the water bottle. Chris was drinking water, but he didn't show any signs of infection. And one could also say that, well, how come Leon didn't get infected? Well, Leon, it seems we didn't see him drink, any kind of water during the whole movie. If anything, at the beginning, we saw that he was hungover. So it only seemed like all he was drinking was just alcohol. So I guess that's how he would get a pass. Though there was an issue with that, and there is an issue with the story, and this, I guess, falls on the writing, which is Johannes Roberts' fault, is that the infection rate for normal humans takes around a week. And the reason I know that information is because if we remember the scene in the diner when they're talking to the hostess, or not the hostess, the waitress, the waitress's eye starts to bleed. And that was the chick in the trailer breakdown that I had no idea who this was. Yeah, and Leon's like, "What's happening with your eye? What's going on?" She's like, "Oh, it's been bleeding for a week." But it's like, shouldn't you have seen a doctor? Like, what's up with that? And she's like, no, it's all right. I think it's okay. It's probably nothing. That was also a really weird scene, but it does confirm to us that it takes around a week for somebody to get fully infected. So there's an issue there. There's a huge, there is a small issue that basically just says, well, how come Leon, for the full week, he didn't drink water? What was he drinking? Was he drinking, mineral water? Or was he drinking some other stuff? Or was he just purely just partying and just drinking alcohol the whole time? We also don't know when Leon arrived in Welcome to Raccoon City. So that was just a small issue that I noticed. But let me know down in the comments what you guys think about that. Now, the other thing that was a little iffy, but I understand why the director did it, is that he wanted to, add a backstory to Claire and Chris Redfield. And he added that they did actually grow up in the orphanage. But the thing is that, they didn't fully explain themselves well. And again, that can be due to the time constraint. So they maybe cut out some stuff. I'm sure they did. That's my suspicion. But, one of the things that I didn't understand completely was that, Claire and Chris grew up at the orphanage, and then they were going to bring Claire to be experimented on. Because that's what the story was. That's what her and her brother's backstory was. But the weird thing is that you understand from the movie that she escapes the orphanage, and she's like 10 years old. And so I don't know what happened with Claire. Has she been surviving on the streets for 20 years? Has she just been doing her own thing, trying to survive, doing her own stuff? That doesn't make sense to me. That should have been explained more in detail. And you know what? I think, again, that goes back to the time constraint. There should have been more time explaining how, if you're going to make a backstory, then you have to explain that backstory. You have to make it solid. And the other thing that concerns me about doing that kind of a backstory for Chris and Claire is that if Claire was about to get experimented on, how come Chris, who stayed at the orphanage, and he also ultimately stayed in Raccoon City for all those years, how come he wasn't infected or experimented on? There was no mention of that. If anything, they actually showed, and I like that aspect, that they showed that Chris was actually thankful to Umbrella. He saw Umbrella as a good thing, right? He saw it as a good thing that was in his life. They paid for his school, they paid for him going to the academy, and so obviously they did see potential in Chris. That was my understanding from the movie, but they never experimented on him. So that was a plot hole that didn't make much sense. Again, let me know in the comments if you guys agree with me there. But that, to me, that was kind of weird. I also really liked how they made Chris kind of like a hard ass, especially when it came to the law, since he was a cop. That whole scene with Claire and Chris talking, and Claire telling him, yeah, it was just part of a hit and run. He's like, what? You're part of a hit and run? You could go to jail for that. And how did you break in the house? And I thought that scene was kind of cheesy, how she just used her knife and she just broke through the house. I guess it's just to show that she's been living in the streets and stuff. Like I just mentioned, that doesn't make sense that a 10-year-old could just leave and I guess make it on her own. That should have been explained a lot better, but I guess they didn't. And that door thing didn't make much sense. But I did like that they added that scene with Chris being kind of like a hard ass on Claire, especially when it came to the law. It really showed his like cop side, which we haven't really seen, but we do know Chris is like that. From the video games, we do know that Chris is very serious all the time. He's very like on his job. That's all he's focused on. And so I like that. I really did like that aspect. And it also fit really well with the character that Chris would be very pragmatic, especially when it came to Claire's conspiracy theories. Chris has always been very realistic. He's always been kind of just focused on whatever the mission is. And so it would make sense that if, he wouldn't be the type of guy to start believing in conspiracy theories unless he was actually in one, unless he actually experienced some kind of conspiracy, which is what happens in the video games. And so I like that. I like that aspect. The other thing that I actually really liked about the movie was, and this is a small thing, but I liked the scene where Chief Irons is like, you know what, I'm leaving the RPD. Leon, you're in charge. Get out of here. Your old man's going to be happy for you. You're not a good cop, but you've grown in the ranks. I'm out of this town. And so he left the town. He went off and he was about to leave the town, but then there was a blockade. And I like that aspect. And you know what? This isn't the first movie to show that. There was the movie Resident Evil Degeneration, the C.G.I. movie. They showed a flashback to one of the family members, the guy that infected himself with the G virus. I don't remember his name. But he basically was trying to get into Raccoon City, but the cops were preventing him from getting in. The other movie that also did the same kind of a scene where they were preventing citizens from escaping Raccoon City because of the infection was Resident Evil 2, The Afterlife, the Paul W.S. Anderson movie, right? They did the same thing. They had the military there, or the umbrella guys, preventing people from escaping the city. I thought that was really well done. It actually added to the horror environment of the movie. It made everything feel like, well, how are we going to get out of this town if we can't use the main roads? And one could easily say, well, we're just going to walk, we're just going to hike through the forest and we'll get out of here. But you know what? When there's creatures and weird things and corners that you don't know and you don't have that much ammunition, there can be an issue, right? But I like that aspect. Now, speaking of ammunition and other stuff, I'm just thinking at the top of my head, that didn't really make sense, that scene where Claire and Leon were in the locker room and all they got was just a shotgun. Claire got some ammo. She got some ammo for her shotgun. She got a pistol, a handgun, and then all Leon got was just armor and a handgun. That's all he got, and then he left. I thought that was weird. That didn't really make much sense. They should have brought a lot more ammunition. That was a kind of a weird scene for me, but anyways, yeah. The other thing that I also thought was weird is that, I didn't understand how the outbreak started. We did understand, they did explain that the outbreak started with the water, right? They did explain that something got out. They compared it to Chernobyl. And that's exactly what Ben was talking about in the video is that something got out. They don't know how something got out, but it got out. In the video games, they had that scene where Birkin gets shot up by, Hunk's team, and then they take, the G virus and the T virus. But William Birkin infects himself with the G virus. Now, they kept that scene in the movie, but it didn't make sense that scene occurs at the end of the movie. That should have occurred during the beginning. So that I have to fault the director's writing there, because it doesn't really make much sense. To be honest, it would have been better if, like I said, William Birkin got infected at the beginning, because also during the whole movie, if we remember correctly, we didn't really see much of William Birkin. We just saw him at the beginning when the sirens started playing. Somebody called him and said, get out of the city. This is going to happen. We don't know who he was talking to. And he just quickly hangs up. He doesn't even say bye. Tells his family, let's get in the car. Let's get out of here. But as he's getting out of the city, there's, that's the last we see of him. We didn't see him going to the checkpoint. And again, that goes back to the time constraints, right? We don't know what he was doing for the whole entire movie until the very end, when we saw him doing that scene where he was just getting all of his stuff together and getting out. So I thought that was a little backwards. That should have been at the beginning so that we could see how the infection started in Raccoon City, how the rats brought it to the sewers, and the sewers, the water, with the water treatment plant, it made the citizens get sick through the water. That's information that a typical person, that somebody that's never heard of Resident Evil, that doesn't know much about the games, won't understand, and that could be a huge plot hole. And so, like I said, it does become an issue. And so the other thing that I found interesting is that this movie, rather than having the outbreak be kind of like be on the news, be something big like it was in the Resident Evil 3 remake, Resident Evil 2, where this small town gets infected with something, we don't know what's happening, but the U.S. government gets involved and literally decides to nuke the whole city, right, or the whole town. For this movie, I kind of found it interesting that the ones that basically blew up the town wasn't really the U.S. government, but in reality, it was Umbrella. It was like a contingency plan that Umbrella had, which I thought was very interesting because in the video games, they always have contingency plans to basically blow up the facility, self-destruct if something were to get out. So I thought that was very cool. I like that scene at the end of the movie where it's not a nuke per se. I would say it's almost like an earthquake bomb because it actually showed the ground kind of just moving and everything kind of exploded, and then there was just a huge sinkhole. So I thought that was very interesting in the movie that they went that route rather than having the U.S. government have be directly responsible for the destruction of Raccoon City. It was now Umbrella's fault. It was almost like Umbrella owned the city, so they were the ones in charge of wiping it out. And they were the ones guarding it from people getting out. So that aspect I thought was interesting. It was different, but I thought it worked. And one can say, well, in the future, how is the U.S. government going to be blamed? Because that's what happens in Resident Evil 4, right? In Resident Evil 6, we do know that in the stories, I think it was President Adam. I think that was his name. If I'm not mistaken, that president was actually about to leak, in Resident Evil 6, he was about to leak all the information that the U.S. government had on Umbrella. That can still occur in this story because we do know from the games that Umbrella was doing military, they were doing military projects for the government. And so they were the ones that were testing all of this so that they could sell to the governments, they could sell to other places, right? This Umbrella Corporation really was kind of just experimenting and selling their projects to other places. And we do know that they were working with the military. And so that aspect wasn't too different, but I kind of liked it. I like that aspect. Now, what I think could save this movie, in my opinion, I think what could be really good for the movie is if they release a director's cut. Now, this is kind of asking a lot. This doesn't usually happen for most movies in most cases. But if we look at like what happened to Zack Snyder, for example, Zack Snyder had a huge budget. People wanted to see his version of the Justice League, and the production companies actually believed in him, and they gave him that opportunity. And I have to say, after watching the Justice League that came out earlier this year, it was a really good movie. If you watch the original Justice League that came out 4 years ago, and you watch the Zack Snyder cut, the Zack Snyder cut is a lot better. And so if this movie had the same treatment, if it also got a director's cut, and it would actually make sense, right? Because Resident Evil 1 did have a director's cut. That would be cool if the movie also had a director's cut. It would fit the brand, but that's asking a lot. Now, one of the things that I thought was really kind of very horror kind of inspired but it also has to do with the video games, is how cheesy the dialogue was at times. There was a lot of cheesy dialogue. It was very much like a horror movie in that aspect where they were being very cheesy. But then again, if we look at the video games, it's the same thing, right? The majority of the video games, they have really bad voice acting. It wasn't until like the more recent games, but even then, it's not perfect. Like I can right now at the top of my head, I can think of that one scene in Resident Evil 4 where Leon's like, hasta luego, and he shoots. That's just really corny, right? We did have some of those scenes in Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 7 as well, though the acting did get better. I guess technically it's not just about the acting, it's also mostly about the writing as well. It is a collaborative effort. But yeah, so that didn't really bother me that much. It was very much like a horror movie, and it makes sense, especially if we're going back to the OG Resident Evils, because they were awful. the majority of the, back in the day, they didn't think that voice acting belonged in a video game. And that was the first kind of games that were doing that. And so that's understandable. It wasn't a huge deal breaker for me, but let me know down in the comments if you thought that. Another aspect that I thought was really well done in this movie that really helped the atmosphere, and I actually talked about this with my brother since we both watched it. We both actually really liked the fact that they had a clock, so they kind of showed the clock. They showed what was happening with this character, what's happening with that. It was very organized, and I like that. Of course, it would have been better if we had more time. Like I've stated before, that was the major issue here. The best case scenario for me is not make Resident Evil into a movie, but make it into a show. Since there's so much lore that you have to talk about, that would be the best case. But we got a movie, so I guess whatever, right? But I really did like that aspect of adding the clock. So it was, they added from midnight to 1 a.m., 2 a.m., all the way up to 5 a.m. And as the audience, we already knew that, they had to get out of the city by 5 a.m. Everything was going to get blown up. And so I really liked that aspect. I thought it was really good. It did help the atmosphere. And I also did enjoy the fact that Wesker at the end, and this is something that I theorized, I did think about this, right? I did say this in one of my trailer breakdown videos, was that I noticed a lot of people were like, how come Wesker doesn't have his glasses? But he actually does, right? My theory is that he was probably going to get his glasses at the end when he fully becomes Wesker. Though that ending credits, that post-credit scene was kind of weird. I have to say, that was a weird scene. When he gets out of the thing and he's out of the body bag and he's completely naked, but we don't see a shot of anything. We don't see him naked, but we see him crawl to the corner and he's like, what's happening? Oh, I can't see anything. And then Eder shows up out of nowhere and hands him his glasses. And then they kind of shot that at a weird angle. So like Ada was like right here. If this was the screen, she was like right here. And then we saw Albert there and we saw kind of like that kind of an angle. I don't know if you watched it, you know what I'm talking about. That was kind of weird. And my brother mentioned that as well. But that was a weird scene. It almost makes it as if Wesker was going to work for Ada, even though it's the other way around in the video games. I know it's a post-credit scene, but they did state in the scene that Wesker was there was differences that were going to occur. So now it was almost like we got to see Wesker as a human, and now we're seeing him as the Wesker as the villain, if we do get a sequel. So that I did appreciate. It was a little weird. There's no denying that. It was shot very strangely, almost like they didn't want to show Tom Hopper's, butt in the movie. But it was weird. Like the fact that they shot it like that was a strange angle. And like I stated, in several of my trailer breakdown videos, I do think that this movie would have been better if it had only focused on Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 1 into one movie, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 into one movie, Resident Evil Code Veronica as it's separate, and so on and so forth. But since, like I said, there's a lot of weird things that were happening behind the scenes, like I mentioned before, I don't think it's... I have a strange suspicion that the person that wanted the first two games to be in one movie was probably Paul W.S. Anderson. That to me sounds like it was his. Like he probably had a say in that. And like I said, executive producers do have a lot of say, especially to what occurs in the movie. I don't know why he was part of this movie. If he had not been part of this movie, maybe it would have been better. But, my thoughts in the movie, my overall review, and it's really hard, right? I mean, it's really hard to review this movie because I can't just review it like any other movie. I have to look at it as a video game movie. And, and like I stated before, right, with video game movies, most video game movies, they do their own thing so that it doesn't, it doesn't step on any toes of the video game lore. But since this movie wasn't executed properly because of the time constraint, I would say personally that this movie was okay, but then I do have to give credit to the director for trying to fit as much lore as he did in the movie, because I can't think of another movie that actually tried to do that. I know that Silent Hill, I watched the first Silent Hill movie, but I don't really know much about Silent Hill. I can't really compare those two examples. But, going back to what I was saying, right, is that, I think this movie was okay. Could have been way better, but I know that there was something going on behind the scenes. And so for that, I think I would give it a 5 out of 10. But since I did have a good time with the movie, I did have, I did enjoy my experience watching the movie. I did have a few laughs during the movie, and also the fact that all of the lore that the director was adding and stuff. So you know what, I got to give him credit for that. So you know what, I think my overall score for the movie would probably have to be maybe a 6 to 6.5. I'm going to go with 6.5 out of 10. I think that this movie is good. I do recommend, like I said at the beginning of the video, I do think that you guys should watch this movie since it is better than the Mila Jovovich movies. There's no denying that. The first Paul W.S. Anderson Resident Evil movie had nothing to do with Resident Evil. But you know what? Like I stated before, if they do end up making a director's cut for the movie, I'm definitely going to watch that. But right now, as it stands, and I've only watched the movie once, like I said, I just watched it, I have to give it a 6.5 out of 10. Johannes Roberts did show a lot of potential of what he could do if he was well funded with this movie, if he actually had more time to work with. I think it would have been better. And so I actually want to give Johannes Roberts the opportunity to make a Code Veronica X movie. That would be awesome. And if it was just a Code Veronica X movie, I think it would just be amazing, right? If this movie had just been, like I stated before, if it had just been either Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1 into one movie, and Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 in another movie, that would have been perfect. It would have actually ranked higher on my overall review score. But since that's not the case, and this whole thing about the production companies not promoting the movie, I think I have to give this movie a 6.5. Now, I don't want you guys in the comments to be like, oh, that's way too high, you're just making excuses at her. No, I mean, that's my opinion at the end of the day, and I do want to hear your guys' opinion down in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. I'm trying to be fair here. Like I said, I don't think it's all the director's fault, and so that's why I believe that, if you're a Resident Evil fan, you should definitely go watch this movie and support it in the movie theaters, because I think it has potential to be better in the sequel. And like always, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to knife that like button, and if this is your first time here, consider shooting that subscribe button in the face, and also remember to punch that notification bell so that you guys never miss a video. And also let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys disagree with me? I want to hear your thoughts. Like I said, I don't really like reviewing stuff, but because I want to be fair. I want to be fair. I don't just blame one person. There's other aspects, especially since a movie is a collaborative experience. To make a movie great, and the same goes with a video game, is that everybody needs to do a good job. The music has to be good. The composition, the director has to be good, the writing has to be good, the acting has to be good. And so if one of those things, doesn't do a good job, then it does affect the overall movie. And so that's why when I'm doing my review, that's what I was thinking. I'm trying to be open here, but like I said, let me know down in the comments what you guys think. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for watching my video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
The right to be a god. That right is now mine.